Okay, Jen.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, I'm Janice Neal-Vincent, and I am today's presenter for Women's Month 2023, Women's History Month, through Community Library, Mississippi. It is a pleasure to be here today and to share my knowledge of the people I'm about to talk about. Again, I am Janice Neal-Vincent, today's presenter.
And good evening, I'm Mary Hardy from Greenville, Mississippi.
And I'm Meredith Coleman McGee, the host of Community Library of Mississippi's History Speaking series. And we would like to thank the Mississippi Humanities Council for supporting this event.
My name is Dickie A. Brown Sr., Dickie Minister of Middle Rock Church International. My pastor, Bishop Randy Cruz Sr., the Middle Rock International Foundation. I'm glad I'm coming on a role with this afternoon.
Good afternoon, I'm Sanders. I am not Cameron. I'm in Connecticut.
Okay, Jen.
During Women's History Month 2023, and a time such as this, when America has not fully grown as a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people, our pause is to reflect on two iconic African-American women who stood tall before the nation and the world and challenged systems of oppression. Born 14 years apart, they visualized a world where all would be respected as human beings. Ella Josephine Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer were forces second to none who looked realistically at the world in which they lived and strive to make it a better place. The more I researched them, the more I thought about the popular song of the 70s, "For God's sake, you've got to give more power to the people." You didn't see me on television. You didn't see news stories about me. The kind of role that I tried to play was to pick up pieces or put together pieces out of which I hoped organization might come. My theory is strong people don't need strong leaders. You can find that comment by Ella Josephine Baker in Women in the Civil Rights Movement. Those words carried her among many with whom she encountered. Let's take a closer look at Ella Josephine Baker. Baker was born in 1903 in Norfolk, Virginia, a civil rights and human rights activist. She had a career that spanned more than 5 decades. That's right, 50 years. A largely behind the scenes organizer, she worked with W.E.B. Du Bois, Thurgood Marshall, A. Philip Randolph, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She was also a mentor for Diane Nash, Stokely Carmichael, Julian Bond, Curtis Muhammad, Bernice Johnson Reagan, and Bob Moses, who emerged as leaders in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. A fighter against racism, sexism, and white supremacy, the Shaw University graduate was called the mother of the civil rights movement. She challenged the status quo and encouraged John Lewis and others in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to speak out against social injustices. Baker loved to hear the cries of the grassroots and was a strong critic of professionalized, charismatic leadership. Thus, during the 60s, she prodded the oppressed to speak up for their rights in light of understanding their worlds. When was it, though, that Baker first learned of social injustice? What caused her to see the world she once knew differently? As a child, she heard the stories of her grandmother, the formerly enslaved, who described how she was beaten and whipped for refusing to marry an enslaved man her owner chose for her. She further recalled other stories her grandmother shared about being an African-American woman. In time, Baker began to understand injustices Blacks still experienced. It's no wonder then that Baker's understanding grew from her grandmother's stories and different situations in which she found herself. During the 1930s, she became actively engaged in the struggle for Black economic development via the influence of George Schuler, a Black journalist. She soon became the national director of Schuler's Young Negroes Cooperative League. Within the league, she taught consumer education, labor history, and African history courses under President Franklin D. Roosevelt's. In Harlem, Baker protested against Italy's invasion of Ethiopia and supporting the campaign to free the Scottsboro defendants in Alabama, was actively involved in YWCA meetings and founded the Negro History Club. Influenced by the Harlem Renaissance, she advocated widespread local action for social change, hence the growth and success of the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century resulted from Baker's messages from the grassroots. The strength of an organization, the activists believed, grew from the bottom up, the grassroots, rather than the top down. Thus, she rejected elitism as she encouraged grassroots commitment and hard work in a willingness and ability to engage in discussion, debate, and decision-making. She advocated the significance of young people and women in the NAACP. She even emphasized egalitarian ideals and pushed the NAACP to decentralize its leadership structure by focusing on more activist campaigns at the local level. She moved from being secretary of the NAACP to director of branches and became the NAACP's highest ranking woman. In her travels throughout the South, Baker met and befriended hundreds of Black people and established long-lasting relationships. Her developed network was vital to the continued fight for civil rights. She used her ability to direct leadership conferences in major cities like Chicago and Atlanta, where she brought on top officials to lecture, deliver welcome addresses, and conduct workshops. Baker later became president of the NAACP's New York branch, where she supervised the field secretaries and coordinated the national office's work with local groups. In this position, she gave more power in the organization to women and fought for people in the field to have more power, and for the local branches to have greater responsibility and autonomy. So we can see from all of these things that Ella Baker was a leader. Ella Baker believed in the grassroots. Though Ella Baker was a graduate from Shaw University, she believed very strongly in the voices of the people, so that leadership would be able to hear what the people were saying to them in an effort for the leaders to go out and speak in behalf of the people. Baker attended the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in Atlanta in 1957. These church-based leaders rooted for social progress and racial justice for Southern Blacks while exercising nonviolence. The leaders were spoken politicians for the Black church. Baker became the first hired staff person in her role of social director of SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She helped initiate voter registration campaigns and identified other local grievances in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, thereby gaining respect for the organizing abilities. The project laid the groundwork for strengthening local activist centers to build a mass movement for the vote across the South. You see, the vote, just as it is for us today, is significant for African American people. The vote is significant, as Baker was talking about that way back when, for all peoples, for the rights to build a democratic country. Critical of the older church-based leadership, Baker believed that the young sit-in leaders, not yet prominent in the movement, could bring change by revitalizing the Black freedom movement. She therefore worked to teach the sit-in participants to be a more militant and democratic force than what she saw within Dr. Martin Luther King's leadership. Baker eventually left Southern Christian Leadership Conference and took up with SNCC. Labeled the godmother of SNCC, Baker was a highly revered adult advisor, according to Crystal Gregory in WordPress. Please allow me here to note that Baker opined that SNCC had a better welcome mat for women than other prominent civil rights organizations like SCLC. Though this was opined, male supremacy along with wide sexism prevailed. Nevertheless, Baker, SNCC, and CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, coordinated the region-wide freedom rides of 1961 and expanded their grassroots movement among Black sharecroppers, tenant farmers, and others throughout the South. Against the notion of one charismatic leader of movements for social change, Baker argued strong people don't need strong leaders. And it was later discovered that Julian Bond made the comment that the person Baker was referencing throughout these particular ordeals was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She persisted that people under the hill, the most oppressed of the community, had to be the ones to decide what action they were going to take and what they needed to do to get from under their oppression. Crying for radical social change and group-centered leadership and participatory democracy, direct citizen participation, that is, Baker influenced student movements of the 60s, as well as radical and progressive groups that gave rise in the 1960s and 70s. The unstoppable activist helped organize the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, an alternative to the all-white Mississippi Democratic Party in 1964. The party challenged the National Party to acknowledge the rights of Southern African Americans to vote in elections. In latter years, many Black leaders were elected in Mississippi as a result of their efforts. As well, women and minorities were allowed to sit as delegates at the Democratic National Convention. In addition to these roles, Baker was an advocate of the Black Power movement, believed that socialism, the transitory phase toward communism, was a human alternative to capitalism, demanded the release of Angela Davis from prison on charges of kidnapping and murder, supported the Puerto Rican independence movement, and spoke out against apartheid in South Africa, and questioned the gendered hierarchy of the civil rights movement and the Black church, composed largely of females, but headed by males. In 1974, at the Puerto Rican Solidarity Freedom Rally, she addressed the crowd with this: "Friends, brothers and sisters in the struggle for human dignity and freedom, I am here to represent the struggle for freedom that has been going on for 300 or more years, a struggle to be recognized as citizens in a country in which we were born. I have had 40 or 50 years of struggles, ever since a little boy on the streets of Norfolk called me a nigger and I struck him back. I had to learn that hitting back with my fist, one individual was not enough. It takes organization. It takes dedication. It takes a willingness to stand by and do what has to be done when it has to be done. A nice gathering like today is not enough. You have to go back and reach out to your neighbors who you don't speak to. And you have to reach out to your friends who think they are making it cruel and get them to understand that they, as well as you and I, cannot be free in America or anywhere else where there is capitalism and imperialism. Until we can get people to recognize that they themselves have to make the struggle and have to make the fight for freedom every day in the year, every year, until they win it. Baker's vital role in the civil rights movement appears in the 1981 documentary Fund, The Story of Ella Baker, directed by Joanne Grant. The New York Public Library houses her papers. She was inducted in the National Women's Hall of Fame in 1994. In 1909, she was honored on a US postage stamp. In 2021, The former Woodrow Wilson Montessori School in Houston was renamed the Baker Montessori School. Now that I have shared information about Ella Josephine Baker, let us look at Fannie Lou Hamer, another African-American woman who was actively engaged. Born in 1917 in Montgomery County, Mississippi, Fannie Lou Townsend was the last of 20 children of Ella and James Lee Townsend. When she was 6 years old, she picked cotton with her family as sharecroppers on W.D. Marlowe's plantation. When she was 12, Fannie had to leave the one-room school for sharecroppers' children, which was open between picking seasons, to help support her aging parents. By age 13, she would pick 200 to 300 pounds of cotton daily, despite having polio. In 1945, Fannie married Perry Hamer, a tractor driver on the Marlowe plantation. But it was in 1962 that she became a civil rights activist, a proponent for Black women in Mississippi. Hamer was known for her use of spiritual hymns and quotes and her resilience. In her persistence to register and exercise her right to vote, the activist was extorted, harassed, fired by her boss, driven with her family from her home, shot at, and assaulted by racists, including members of the police. These acts didn't deter her from instilling in others their rights. Thus, thousands of African Americans in Mississippi were encouraged to register and vote because of Fannie Lou Hamer's persistence. They talked about how it was our right that we could register and vote. I had never heard until 1962 that Black people could register and vote, said Fannie Lou Hamer. Hamer's involvement grew in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and conducted workshops and taught classes at many Southern Christian leadership conferences. She petitioned the federal government for resources for impoverished Southern Black families. We've been waiting all our lives and still getting killed, still getting hung, still getting beat to death. Now we are tired waiting. Co-activists also experienced the kind of brutality that Hamer had experienced and spoke about. When Hamer became a field secretary for SNCC in 1963, while traveling by bus to a Christian leadership conference in Charleston, South Carolina, they stopped in Winona, Mississippi. Some who went inside a local cafe were refused service. Then a Mississippi State Highway patrolman took out his billy club and intimidated the activists into leaving. Hamer and the party were arrested. In the booking room, Hamer's colleagues were beaten by the police. When Hamer resisted officers who were repeatedly groping her, one walked over, took my dress, pulled it up over my shoulders, leaving my body exposed to 5 men, said Hamer. In the midst of it all, I was almost fatally beaten by 2 inmates in a cell who followed a state trooper's orders. Hamer never fully recuperated from that particular incident. It left her profound physical and psychological effects throughout the rest of her life, including a blood clot over her left eye and permanent damage on one of her kidneys. Not deterred, though, from her vision, Hamer returned to Mississippi and organized voter registration drives and the Freedom Summer Initiative. Freedom Summer volunteers revered her as a mother seeking multiracial human and civil rights. She even tutored Sammy Young Jr. and Wendell Paris, Tuskegee University students who became profound activists and organizers. Let me pause here to say that there were many of the elitist or educated populists who did not like the way Fannie Lou Hamer taught. In other words, they critiqued her speech. They knew that she did not have a formal education, and they talked down about her. Even some of the politicians talked down about her, white and Black. But Fannie Lou Hamer was widely heard and accepted by many who understood her plight, who understood her concerns for the Black community and all communities. They understood her concerns for women. They understood her strong criticism against white women who were looking down at her. They said things like, Fannie Lou Hamer didn't know how to speak. Fannie Lou Hamer didn't know how to dress. And the criticism went on and on. But my point here is, despite the criticism, Fannie Lou Hamer knew her calling, and she continued to message in behalf of the grassroots. She continued to message about segregation. And that's why she could sing so well when she would come to places like Jackson State when I was a student and be with her group with This Little Light of Mine. Some of you may have been back there, I don't know, or may have been somewhere and heard Fannie Lou Hamer sing in the various groups. But she could rally a crowd, get everybody involved, move us to our feet for the cause of voter registration, involvement, and the right to be actively engaged. In 1964, she helped co-found the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Ella Baker, that Ella Baker was one of the co-founders. So along with Fannie Lou Hamer and a few others, came along the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party to ensure there was a party for all the people and to prevent all white Democratic parties' attempts to mute African-American votes. Research shows that President Lyndon Johnson at the time was determined to mute the voice of Fannie Lou Hamer across the air. because he did not want Fannie Lou Hamer to be aired. And so what he did was to come along in the time that the media had allotted for Fannie Lou Hamer to speak at the Atlantic, New Jersey convention, was to talk to some governors throughout the United States about some point that did not make any type of significance in light of what was going on at that Democratic convention. But then later, I would like to say around midnight, but it was not that late, but it was in the evening time on the same day, because Fannie Lou Hamer had spoken so well in making her point about voter registration and the need for Blacks to be on that Democratic National Party. The media aired Fannie Lou Hamer's speech. And so the people were able to hear her message. And it was a speech that went over very well. This was the speech where we learned that Fannie Lou Hamer said, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." And of course, even today, we hear politicians saying those words. But those words came from Fannie Lou Hamer. So her voice continues to rally down through the ages. Fannie Lou Hamer. Here is what she said, one thing she said at the convention on that particular day. "All of this is on account we want to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off the hooks because our lives are threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America? I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." Senator Hubert Humphrey stepped on Johnson's behalf for 2 seats to be granted to the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in 1968 for a reform convention, which was rejected by the MFPDP, with Hamer saying, "We didn't come all this way up here to compromise for no more than we got here. We didn't come all this way for no 2 seats when all us is tired." Afterwards, yes, you guessed it, all of the white members of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party walked out. But the speech changed the course of Black voting rights in America. They should have kept their seats. In 1968, the Democratic Party adopted a clause that demanded equality of representation from their state's delegates, and the MFDP was finally seated. Hamer was elected as a national party delegate. Both Blacks and whites looked down, as I said, upon Hamer. But look at what happened as she continued the fight for justice, as she continued the fight for the rights of Blacks to vote, as she continued the fight for women to have their rights. Fannie Lou Hamer. This is what led Charles Nesbitt, a freedom singer, to say, her singing showed the kind of dedication that she had, the struggle and the pain, the frustration and the hope. Her life would be that song. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. I can still see her and the singers there at Jackson State University singing This Little Light of Mine. And as soon as she finished singing, she went into a powerful speech about who human beings are and what human beings are supposed to be doing in the society in which we live.
Janice, your volume has gone down. Can you turn your speaker up?
My volume has gone down?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Thank you. Hamer was an equality seeker across all aspects of society. She partnered with the National Council of Negro Women to establish an interracial and interregional support program called the PIG Project to provide protein for people who previously could not afford meat. Through a small pig bank that she started, a family could care for a pregnant female pig until it bore its offspring. She pioneered in 1965 the Freedom Farm Collective and raised $8,000 to purchase 40 acres of land previously owned by a Black farmer who could no longer afford to occupy the land. The land became the Freedom Farm with three main objectives: to establish an agricultural organization that could supplement the nutritional needs of America's most disenfranchised people, to provide acceptable housing development, and to create an entrepreneur business incubator that would provide resources for new companies and retraining for those with limited education but manual labor experience. The National Women's Political Caucus was co-founded by Hamer in 1971. She emphasized the power that women could have as a voting majority in this country and said, a white mother is no different from a Black mother. The only thing is they haven't had as many problems, but we cry the same tears. Honors and awards include Doctor of Law from Shaw University, honorary degrees from Columbia College Chicago and Howard University, National Women's Hall of Fame. Remembrance of her life was given in the U.S. House of Representatives on the 100th anniversary of Hamer's birthday, October 6, 2017, by Texas Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. To sum it up, I raise the question: where are the thoughts and actions of Ella Josephine Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer in our lives today? While we can weaken the dynamic, we cannot disassemble the fight for justice. Despite the generation and the key players in it, there will be women who will come forth in the struggle. They will come and boldly speak to the times. They will be heard, and others will rise to the occasion. Let us then remember the voices of Ella Josephine Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer, women second to none.
Thank you, Janice Neal-Vincent. That was very informative, very powerful. And the part about her grandmother, I had never heard that, of course, some of the other things, but that really struck me that her grandmother refused to marry a man that her master wanted her to marry. And so that story sparked Ella Baker activist life. And yeah, you know, Ella Baker, one of the things that I was so impressed with about Ella Baker was that when she was the director of SCLC, when Martin Luther King was the first president in '57, she was the one who would, as her in her job capacity, she wasn't there just telling people what to do. She was going to the pool hall and to the clubs and everywhere to get people involved. She was on the ground working. And you mentioned that some of the people didn't like Fannie Lou Hamer because she broke verbs and didn't speak correct English. But what they learned later was that she was the one who brought people to the movement as well, because she spoke the language of the people, which is breaking verbs. And you know, and the other thing was, when I became a community organizer in the 90s, the thing that none of our supervisors would let anybody do, whether they had a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, nobody could go out in the community dressing like a college student. We had to dress like the people and talk to the people and follow the people, not try to boss the people. And when I think about young you mentioned his name, Stokely Carmichael. When you see him historically in the pictures, he had on overalls, whether he was in Alabama, Georgia, anywhere. And he was dressed like the people he was trying to reach to register to vote or to try to challenge the white power structure. But anyway, those were just some of the things. So anybody have any questions or comments, please feel free. Thank you, Janice. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
And we have an evaluation for everybody to fill out for the Mississippi Men's Council.
Well, let me say, while others may be thinking, these two women understood, this is my opinion, the world in which they lived. We're looking at one who had the formal training, and we're looking at the other one who only went to about, I forget the grade, but it was grade school level. But they both understood human nature. There was Fannie Lou Hamer on the plantation, a young child with polio, who did the best she could, like Thurgood Marshall would say, with what she had. She learned how to work with the people as she was working with them in light of the role that she had been given there in the sharecropping situation. Looking at the man who owned the plantation and how she was able to discern over time and went on to early adulthood to see that what he was doing was not right, in telling her that if she did not go down there and get her name off the register to vote, she would have nowhere to live. It did not matter to her about the living quarters because she was already a sharecropper. And so she was happy to get away from him in the first place. But she continued And then over the years, where she and her family were living over time, the home was destroyed. So much was happening to her. She was beat constantly. None of those things stopped her from doing what she knew in her mind what was the right thing to do. Here we are here in 2023, and we are still struggling with this voting situation. We can look at the politicians and what's going on. We see some come, we don't see them anymore until voting time next time. We are in a situation where we're being pushed aside for folks to get in who don't deserve a right to be in. All of these things, these two women were complaining about. And not only that, the internal problems that Baker dealt with are still with us. So to argue, come and speak the rhetoric, but not demonstrate it, is what Baker was primarily talking about. And when she was called for, according to my research, to be on the team with Dr. King and others, she saw quickly that there were some problems in leadership because of being pushed into, I suppose, mutation sometimes, as is what happens when we're working with people. But eventually she moved on and just continued to do what she knew she needed to do, which is why so many of the young rallied around her. Meredith, you said something about speaking the language. She was speaking their language. She was speaking their language. And so we can come out dressed up in suits and whatever, but if we're not speaking the language of the people, that doesn't mean anything. So I'm just honored to have been invited to participate on the month's platform in reference to the two people that were given to me. And I hope that we have learned something from what these two people were talking about and putting forth effort about in what they were all about. It's just really very important. And we can go out there on YouTube and other places and see them talking to the crowds, expressing themselves. It's important that we keep it up. Whatever that is that we have been instilled inside, we need to keep it up because others benefit from such. And we can learn so much one to the other as we work in our strides to make America what it ought to be. Land of the people, home of the brave, for the people, by the people, for the people. Let us remember.
Yeah, and Janice, I like that you gave direct quotes from both women. And Ella Baker, there were two words, and I put in the definition in the chat that she always talked about: capitalism and imperialism. And also, if you know, when you kind of look back at her life, she first was in the NAACP a long time, then in SCLC, then she helped start STIC, because I think that she was trying to make it better, because we were getting a little bit, but there was so much more that we needed, just kind of like how we are now. We've made some strides, but we have so many hills to climb even now. And it seemed like she went from the NAACP to SCLC, that she helped start sneaking, because she wanted the youth to have their voice. She wanted the women to have their voice. She wanted our race to have their voice. And Fannie Lou Hamer wanted the same thing. She was a great spokesperson and a great, like you said, to rally people, to get people hyped and get people ready to work. And I think that there's a similarity of them both, even though one was educated and the other one, but the other one lived they both lived the life, and they understood the struggle and the hills that we needed to climb, in a sense.
Okay, I really, truly enjoyed the presentation. And it just reminds us that the struggles continues, that some of the same things that Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker went through and worked to do away with are the same things that are happening today, that we just need to be mindful that we need to keep fighting for what's right for all of us, all people. It was very enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you. And one thing, this makes me think about the Black Lives Matter situation, when on some days there were more whites out marching than there were Blacks. The people were rallying. The voice was being spoken, and conscience was on the rise. So it didn't matter if I was to a white person who was out there for the right thing with the people. It did not matter if I, the Black one, did not appear, because conscience told that one, you must appear. You must appear. So when I was able to see with my naked eyes what had happened in a divided America, I felt so good to know that there were many people unlike me who were out there for justice. And I feel good about that today. So you're right, no matter what the generation may be, there will always be a struggle of some sort. And we have a responsibility as human beings to engage ourselves, because this is about whoever we are. We are human beings, and one person cannot do it all. One person may be speaking for us, but we've got to come in and help, even when we don't see eye to eye on something. Whatever we are seeing, it must be known for others to catch on and get involved, because involvement is what is the order of the day. If we sit back and do nothing about whatever the negative situation is, that's where we are going to continue to be. But when we make our voices known and heard, then we begin to see, at least from those who are out there rallying, that things can be done. They may come along in latter years, as was the case for some of the things that Fannie Lou Hamer was arguing about. But they will come with persistence, given the right ones. What do they say? You're in the right church, but you're in the wrong pew. You see, so if I get myself in the right pew, if I get myself around the right people, then hey, we can go somewhere. You know, I might be left out there by myself for a while, but if I keep working on this, there may be some who will begin to say, hey, she's got something going on here. Hey, let's get with it.
Well, I see that Angela Stewart, who is also a historian,
Yes.
is here. Thank you for dropping in. And she's our next speaker from at 3. She's doing famous
Black women writers.
right. And I
Black
know her
women
favorite.
writers.
I know who her favorite writer is. Do you know Janice? Janice, who is her favorite writer? Margaret Walker Alexander.
Yes.
That's what she
And I want to tell Dr. Vincent, as always, an excellent job. I always get excited when I see Dr. Vincent, because I think about my mom and having been one of her teachers, and the wonderful article Dr. Vincent wrote on my mom for the Mississippi Link. And so I'm appreciative of all of that. And I'm looking forward to this afternoon. Hold on, just.
Oh well, isn't that something? You Dorothy Stewart was your teacher.
Yes,
wow.
my 7th grade teacher.
She was your
My
second
7th grade
teacher?
history teacher
Oh my
at
goodness.
Lanier High School.
Oh wow.
Oh
Man,
yes.
we have come full circle. What
It's a very small world.
Yes, it is. So she taught you
Yes,
at Lanier?
Right, at Lanier. I attended Lanier 2 years. Then the family moved over in the Verdon Addition area to the home house. But yes, I was in class 7A. And
oh my
God. History teacher.
Wait a minute, what grade was you in when Dorothy Stewart was your history teacher? What grade were you?
7th grade. 7th.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Wow.
7th grade.
And Meredith, you know how your mom and my mom every day, every morning, early in the morning, there was a call coming to the house, and as my mama would say, it would be Hazel, Janelle, Meredith, Coleman.
How?
She got out a whole name.
Oh my God. Well, because your mother was in all of our village.
Yes, because she loves some Willa and Kella and Khadijah and
yes,
just real, just everybody.
Yeah, John Real. Yeah, she would go with me and Mama to my book events when I was getting going. Read everything and be supportive.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So I'm looking forward to this afternoon to talk about Black women writers. And again, Dr. Vincent, excellent job. Because as you said, Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer knew that people had power in and of themselves. They didn't need to be led by outside forces who may or may not have their best interest at heart, but that they could lead themselves. And, Fannie Lou Hamer transitioned into looking at economic empowerment, particularly for women in the Delta. So, and Ella Baker would say, don't let anybody take your voice or your, autonomy. You have just as much right to lead yourself as anybody else. So 2 dynamic women. Thank you, Dr. Vincent.
Thank you.
Well, please download the evaluation and fill it out. And I want to thank Community Library of Mississippi and the Mississippi Humanities Council. And I want to thank you, Janice, for a fabulous presentation and teaching us so much about Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer. Yes. Does anybody else have any questions before we end? They haven't spoken yet. Okay. Well, one person said in the chat, great speaker and great research on these two trailblazers. And I agree.
That's so nice.
Very good. Well, okay. With I'm gonna. This is already live on Facebook, so you'll be if you want to share it later with someone else, feel free to. It's gonna be on Community Library Mississippi's Facebook page. Thank you, and you all have a wonderful day. And I'll see you at 3 o'clock, Angela. A few minutes early. 2 minutes
Yes.
early.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
All
Thank
right,
you.
bye-bye.
All right, y'all have a good one.
you.